Alright, welcome to today's little video, and this one is going to be about basically two things. One is a very nice short paper by the philosopher C.D. Broad on egoism, the theory of human motives, and it's an interesting paper in which Broad distinguishes psychological egoism from psychological hedonism. He offers some arguments against psychological hedonism, shows that it's a very implausible theory of human motivation, talks a bit about psychological egoism, and then argues that even psychological egoism is probably not able to explain every human action, even if it is often enough to explain what and why people do. And besides that, besides talking a bit about this paper and looking at this paper, I'm going to be taking notes. So if you're maybe a student and you have to annotate papers, you have to take notes on papers, then you might find it good practice to look at the paper together with me and think about how you would take notes, which parts you would pull out, or if you have any questions on why I pull out certain parts of the paper, highlight certain parts of the paper, then it's probably a good practice exercise to go along. Post questions if you have any under the video. And I actually looked at this paper a little bit earlier in its printed form, so I'm going to be peeking at it, and as in every case, when taking notes, I'm going to very quickly make a note on what it is: egoism as a theory of human motives. Now, this is not a new paper, but it's one of those papers which is not about any particular experiment. It's more broadly about the idea that egoism is what explains every human intentional, conscious, voluntary action. We're always fundamentally egoistic, and this idea is very prominent today in culture, just as it was in 1950, and for a long time, I think, at almost every age and in every society. A lot of people probably subscribe to it, but you need to be a little bit more careful about what exactly you mean by this, right? So what Broad distinguishes here is a number of different kinds of ultimate desires which almost everyone has. And he goes through a number of examples. Philosophers, psychologists sometimes talk about the desire to get pleasant experiences or to avoid unpleasant ones, or the desire to get and exercise power over others, and the desire to do what is right and avoid doing what is wrong. As usually, philosophers try to look for some kind of fundamental element that could serve as a starting point, and we could sort of deduce the other kinds of desires from that. So many people have this kind of fundamentalist idea that there has to be one kind of ultimate desire. And that explains why we have all the other desires we have and all the other kinds of motivations that we have. Broad will be arguing that this is false. I'm broadly in agreement with Broad. And you can be a pluralist about ultimate desires and think that, well, there are different kinds, or you can be a monist and say, no, there is one kind of fundamental ultimate desire. This is the first paragraph, and we can say the topic is broadly considered moral psychology and motivation and desires and egoism. And it's better to say that these are topics, right? It's good to keep up some level of precision throughout your note-taking. And then, many philosophers and psychologists posit a fundamental desire that explains all our actions and why we have all other motivations. this is used monism about ultimate desires. Others argue that there are several kinds of ultimate desires. They are pluralists about ultimate desires, right? So we got the first paragraph covered, and probably I want to highlight these two things because they're kind of the key terms here. And then Broad goes on and tries to explain what egoism means, right? So egoism is compatible with both views about desires, and in one sense it's the idea that that human beings are psychologically egoistic, and this has a more specific form. Psychological egoism is the idea, more broadly, that all our actions are motivated by desires aimed at our own good. A more specific version is psychological hedonism. All our actions are motivated by desires, and here's the idea that there's only one kind of ultimate desire, and that is that we should have, the only kind of ultimate desire is the desire to get or prolong pleasant experiences and to avoid or cut short unpleasant experiences for oneself, right? So we have three elements to what we're talking about here, and motivated by desires. The only kind of ultimate desire is the desire to get or to prolong pleasant experiences and to avoid or to cut short unpleasant experiences. For whom? For oneself, right? So the idea is that we are never motivated by the well-being, the happiness, the pain of other people, helping to relieve them of pain or causing them pain. But we are only ever motivated by the idea that we experience as much of things that we find pleasant and as little of what we find unpleasant as we can, right? So other people are not important in any way to our motivations, according to this view. Now, what Broad does next is he goes through examples of egoistic desires. And he lists, I think, if I remember correctly, 7 types. 7 types are distinguished. Some of the distinctions they're all quite interesting, but not all of them matter very much to the arguments that Broad gives in the paper. We're going to quickly list them, nevertheless, just to be fair to the paper and have a relatively complete handout. This can be on the longer side, especially if you do a first draft and later come back to edit it or work with it. It's good to have a one-page version, and then it's good to have like a longer or like a more detailed article notes, paper notes. Desire to be a self of a certain kind, right? To have a certain personality. These are the kind of desires that he so far distinguished. Desire for self-preservation, staying alive. Desire for one's own happiness, right? Experiencing nice things, what psychological hedonism is about, and not experiencing unpleasant things. Desire to be a self of a certain kind. It's also interesting. Desire to be a certain kind of person. And it's a little bit different, according to him, from desire for self-respect. Now the difference, the examples he gives here is desire for self-respect is about what kinds of emotions towards myself I have, and it's in that sense I don't want to feel bad about myself, I don't want to feel that I'm a bad person. Whereas to be a certain kind of person is about what kind of mental and bodily powers and dispositions I have, right? Am I diligent? Am I successful? Am I able to get through my daily routine? Am I able to make people happy around me? Can I take care of children I have? Can I look after the people who I'm supposed to take care of and help develop at my work? If you're a doctor, these are your patients. If you're a lawyer, that's your client. If you're a financial advisor, it's also the person whose investments you are supposed to help make prosper, and so on. In my case, it's usually my students and my colleagues who I work with and do research with. And the next one is desire to get and keep property. Right, you need to get stuff first in order to keep it. And then next, desire for self-assertion. This is interesting. This is connected to power in Broad's view, right? Power over myself, power over others, and maybe to be certain kinds. We can make a quick note here that this has to do with abilities, dispositions, character traits, basically what kind of person we are, and self-respect has to do with how we feel about ourselves. Right, the two things are different because we might be someone who is very able. We might be able to do many things: code, edit videos, run 5 minutes in 3:20, and so on and so on and so on. That's right, run 5 kilo in 15 minutes and so on. And those are all amazing things, but we might still feel bad about ourselves. This is not the kind of person we want to be, or in other ways we can't live up to who we want to be. And the last one is desire for self-display, right? This is how we would like other people to react to us, right? Others' reactions, and others', we could even say attitudes, right, to us. So one of the nice things about this little list is that it helps us to distinguish 7 kinds of desires, and Brode is going to use these distinctions to argue that, you know, some of these desires are fairly common and they cannot be reduced to the other kinds of desires, and because of that we cannot find a plausible monist theory, egoistic theory, or motivational theory, and also that hedonism cannot be right, since some of these motivations are not entirely just about ourselves. And then he goes on and talks about egoistic motive stimulants. Now these are, he also distinguishes between 4 egoistic motive stimulants, right? So what are these? This is an interesting thing brought in here by Brode, and the 4 things he distinguishes here is that very often we come to stand in certain relations to other things or persons, and that's why we have special desires regarding those people, right? Ownership. If I have a house, if I have a project, if I have a garden, I'm very much more inclined to care about that kind of thing. Ownerships makes want to take care of what we own, right? If I don't own something, I'm a lot less likely to care about it. Blood relationship, right? Taking care of family, to some extent, of course, people we feel about, like family. It can be your pets, can be your closest friends, can be some of your team members if you're really tight with people who you're trying to achieve something with, and that comes under relations of love and friendship, right? We all have these, and this is a very nice category that we all want to be fellow members of an institution to which one feels loyalty and affection, right? I mean, he mentions this is a bit old style, of course, 1950s. At that time, saying something like this was perfectly common sense. An Englishman will be inclined to do services to another Englishman which he would not do to a foreigner. Probably today we're a bit more globalized than that, but you could say that still, if you're in a certain professional field, you're more likely to help someone. If you work in a certain company, I work in a university, I take care and I care about how the university is doing, how our students are doing, how my colleagues are doing, and so on and so on. And I care about this obviously more than how much I care about other institutions and their students. Of course, I wish them well, but I won't be able to actually care about them as much. Now, these things, these motive stimulants, are going to dispose us, make it more likely that we have certain these make it more likely that we have certain desires, right? Because there's a connection between us and the things that these desires are about. And then these are pretty egoistic in a sense that they're all very much connected to what we feel, what we care about. And so what we can say next, according to Broad, is that some of these belong into a group that even if no other person would have existed in the world, we could have, right? Things like we would still want to avoid dying, we would want to preserve ourselves, our own happiness, we would still want to be probably someone, have some amount of, be at ease with ourselves, have some kind of self-respect. But if there are no other persons and things, then of course we can't really have a desire for property or self-assertion or self-display. Right? So maybe 1 to 4, right? We could have 1 to 4 even if no other person would exist. That means that these could be felt by a person who knew or believed himself to be the only existent in the universe, and they're self-confined in this sense, right? They're really only about ourselves. Nobody else needs to exist or have anything else to do with us in order for us to have these kind of motivations. Now, there are some that are extroverted, they're directed at the outer world, and some which are introverted, right, directed at our own attitudes, our own relationships, what is important for us, our own values, emotions, and so on. So self-confined desire is purely introverted, whereas there can be egoistic desires which are not self-confined, and they can be mixed. They can be introverted, extroverted, and so we could say that if, well, that's what Broad says, Broad argues, rather states or divides things up in this way. There are self-centered or introverted desires that are still not simply just about ourselves, but are more about ourselves than other people. And we could say, property, self-assertion, self-display, and affection. These are desires which are not, well, desires for which others need to exist, but are mainly about us, are, right, these ones. And then desires for which others need to exist and are just as much, maybe even more, about them as about us, but still they're about us in some way, are other regarding desires, and these are still self-referential. What he means by this is that if I care about someone, say my children, my brother, my sister, if I care about a friend, of course I care about them. I want them to be happier. I want them to tackle their exam. I want them to get the promotion they're going for. I want them to, live in a country which respects and treats them well, and so on and so on. But there is a reference to me. I want that because they're my children or my sister, my brother. That's why I have this element of caring. That's why I have the desire that their life goes well. I have it at a stronger sense, and I'm willing to do something, right? I'm motivated to do something. Here the example is the desire of a mother to render services to her own children, which she would not be willing to render to other children. It's an instance of a desire which is other regarding by self-referential. Okay, so these are other regarding desires, and they're typically the kinds of desires that are listed under the relational ones, right? Blood relationships, relations of love and friendships, being members of a community, a society that we care about, and so on. Okay, so how about the relations between desires? Now, one of the interesting thing is that some people would say self-preservation is a necessary condition of all the other desires, right? If we don't survive, we cannot be happy, and we cannot have any other desires. Is their most fundamental desire maybe self-preservation? After all, our existence is needed. Well, not really, Broad says, because if you think about it a bit more carefully, the truth is that we might want to exist because we enjoy existence, right? We want happiness. If we wouldn't be attached to our lives, we probably wouldn't care about our existence. But the thing is, people still want to keep going on very often, even if it's more likely that their life will be hard. Think about people who their country has been invaded by a more powerful country. You can think about Afghanistan when the US invaded. You can think about the Tibetans when China invaded them. You can think about Ukraine recently. You can think about the people protesting against the military government in Myanmar. These people will probably have pretty bad lives and tough lives. They might go through a lot of hardship, but they still want to go on. Many of them will want to rebuild, fight, and try, but even if not, they are not just going to lay down and die, luckily, thanks God. Otherwise, powerful people would get their way very easily, and the rest of us would be in the bin, right? So, not really. The desire to self-preserve seems to relate to being able to experience life. But then again, even if our experiences look bleak, people want to go on living, right? So some of these things seem to be independent of each other, and which seem to have both motivations. And of course, often we want to have power or property to preserve ourselves, or to keep ourselves alive, or to be happy. So we could say that these are just derived desires. They're not fundamental or really substantial in a way. But that's actually not necessarily true. There are many people who chase money, which is power, for a long time. Think about successful business people or politicians, and many of them seem to like property or power for itself, and they're willing to make a lot of sacrifices that must cost them some happiness, personal strife, family conflicts, and so on and so on and so on. So, at first sight, desires for property or power look derived. They can be instruments to survival or happiness. But actually many people seem to have them because they value their objects in themselves, not as means or instruments to achieving something further, right? So again, this is an argument for pluralism about values, and Brody is trying to show that there's no hierarchy among the desires. There's no single one that would help us to explain why we have all the others. Of course, someone could say that, well, look, the person who desires power or property enjoys the experience of getting and or exercising power or amassing and owning property. Sure. So in that sense, we could say that this person still just wants to have pleasant experiences. They're hedonist. They just care about the enjoyment, the pleasure they derive from these things. And for them, maybe having these things or using these things or gaining these things, being able to gain these things is the pleasure. That's fair enough. But the thing is that nobody will want these things if they don't enjoy them. So we cannot explain by enjoying them why they enjoy them, right? That is, if your argument is something like he wants power because he enjoys gaining power, sure, but why does he enjoy gaining power, right? Well, because he finds power on its own enjoyable. It's circular. You get a bad kind of circularity here with the argument. So here we kind of presuppose that people don't really enjoy the wealth or the power in itself. They enjoy that it makes them happy in some kind of way. But this again does not necessarily need to be true. It need not be true that people only pursue power or wealth because they then enjoy having or using it. They might simply enjoy power and wealth as they are, right? And gaining pleasurable experiences. The pleasurable experience might just be the having of these things in themselves, or pursuing these things in themselves. So in that sense, it doesn't relate to more fundamental chase for happiness. In fact, you might think that many people who are very rich or powerful are content in that they have what they want, but they're not necessarily happy in the sense of happy that they would experience very, relaxed or cheerful or joyful or moments, or they would, help to make other people happy, or they would be particularly pleasant or feel in a pleasant way. But they might not have an issue with this. It's an interesting thing about happiness. And then Broad goes over a couple of considerations regarding self-display and self-respect, where the same situation seems to apply. Okay, and from this, what he wants us to agree to after all these discussions is that, but there's no single kind of desire to which all the other desires could be reduced, right? Okay, so what about special desires, like what a mother feels for health, happiness, and prosperity for their children? This is predominantly other regarding, though it is self-referential. Surely it is. And then some people would say that, well, thinking about my children doing well, surviving, having a good personality, good dispositions, great experiences, gaining love and respect, that makes me feel good. That's why I care about their happiness, because it gives me happiness. So in this sense, we would be talking about egoistic motivation, and I think that exists to a certain degree. We do gain happiness out of the success and love and good fortunes of those we care about, and that can be a reason and a motivation for us to care about that. I often think that I really enjoyed all the opportunities I had for traveling in my life, and I want my kids to have it, because if I imagine them going through those experiences, it makes me very happy, and I think it's going to make them happy as well. So I care about their happiness. That's something valuable for me, but also, of course, this thought makes me happy, which makes me more motivated to pursue this than other ways of making them happy. So it's other regarding, but it's still self-referential, right? It's a powerful motive stimulant, as Broad says. Now, there can be very mixed motivations, right? So Broad mentions here that, being a good parent, that also has to do with self-display. Other people will think well of you, and that's also pleasant, and naturally many people get a little bit too addicted to that. But even if you're not, it's normal to feel good about other people regarding you well when you're doing well. There's nothing wrong with that. And in this sense, we get this kind of mixed motivations why we care about people around us. But it doesn't mean that there's no element, no other regarding element in such care. So what does this mean for psychological egoism and hedonism, what we started with, right? You remember, psychological hedonism is the idea that all our actions are motivated by the desire to get or to prolong pleasant experiences and to avoid or cut short unpleasant experiences for ourselves, right? It doesn't bode well. So this theory would basically say that only the self-confined motivations, and even among them only the desire for one's own happiness, is at the bottom. Now, Broad says that all the examples we looked at already shows that that cannot really be true. Such a theory cannot well explain why we have certain motivations and why we do specific things. There are many self-regarding, but also other regarding desires, which are not self-confined, right? What else? Well, what follows is that psychological hedonism is implausible. Some of our desires do seem to be non-self-contained, i.e., that is other regarding. So, if we consider psychological egoism to be a good theory that helps us to explain why people do the things they do, why they have the motivations they have, we need to focus on its pluralist versions. Okay, so hedonism, which is one of the monist versions of psychological egoism, is discarded by Broad. And then Broad basically goes through three kinds of examples. One is a person who can psychological egoism explain all actions well, right? So that's the next question. We could add here, can a pluralist psychological egoism, which allows many kinds of desires, ultimate desires, to motivate our actions. Broad is ultimately skeptical. He says probably most of our actions can be explained by psychological egoism, but not all of them. And he uses three examples to show this. In the first one, just go along with his marking up, it's easier to track what's going on. There's a man who writes a will, and nobody can know until he dies what is in his will, but it actually does take care of most of the people that are close to him in considerate and substantial ways. Why does he do this? Why is he not telling other people what is in his will? And obviously, we need to think of this as a person who believes when he dies, he really dies. There's no soul, there's no afterlife, or even if there is, it's disconnected to the life we live on Earth, right? It's not like we're sitting on the edge of a cloud looking down and still feeling joy when we see the face of a loved one light up. No, we're gone from this world substantially. Even if you're a religious person, you might believe, as some of the religions suggest, that there's a big difference between life in this realm and in the others. If you're an atheist, you're a non-believer, it's easier to, even easier to subscribe to this. Let's say the person in the example is like that. There's no mental confusion. They know when they're gone, they're gone. So they're not going to get anything pleasant out of how people react. It's not like, oh, the joy they will feel, the surprise, and so on, right? Because you won't be around to see their joy. Could you be thinking about that joy? Sure. Could you think about the gratitude that the beneficiaries will feel toward you after your death? Yeah, why not? I mean, that could be something you feel. It's just that it's unlikely. There are better explanations, or this seems to be at least a partial explanation. So there's nothing wrong with that explanation. It's just that it's not a particularly complete um, and not a particularly egoistic explanation. So whatever explanation we come up with, it seems to be very strongly other regarding. It seems to be concerned with the well-being of others, the happiness of others, to at least as much or a greater degree than with their own happiness. And one of the reasons is that even if they are like, wow, there's all this suspense I'm creating and then it will be released in a very positive way, it's going to be amazing. Sure, but it's only amazing and this gives them pleasure only because, imagining this gives them pleasure only because they are happy about the happiness of other people already, right? So that grounds the happiness they feel. It's the happiness of others is actually from which their own happiness derives. So it's unlikely also that it's a case of self-display, right? He won't be around. Um, he won't be around to know how people regard him or enjoy how people regard him. And especially if this person, as in the example, really took care to look after the work, look after the needs of those he's leaving something behind for, then of course he will be well regarded, but he will be well regarded because he was genuinely caring. So while, yes, maybe it was part of his motivation to be well regarded and well thought of after he's gone, or she's gone, after they are gone, but they will be well regarded and well thought of because they were a caring person who really looked after and took care of others. So again, it's a case of mixed motivation. So the beneficent, the stater making a secret testament, right? So this person is most likely, is at most acting egoistically only partially. Whatever good effects he hope or they hope to achieve after they're gone, they only achieve it if they have some genuine care and experience some happiness by taking care, by meeting the needs of others, right? So in this case at least, purely egoistic motivation seems to be unlikely. Now, the next case is similar in a certain way. We're thinking about a person who donates to a charity anonymously. Right, so this is case B, the anonymous donor, charity donor. Again, it's interesting and quite insightful how Broad goes through these cases, because one of the common thread here is, you could think again about somebody wanting to feel good about themselves, but unless they want the institution they're donating to do well, to flourish, there will be nothing attractive about that flourishing, and there will be nothing that enables them to feel good about what they have done, right? So an essential factor in making him want to benefit the institution may be that it is his old college or that a great friend of his is at the head of it. Sure, no problem with that, but there is an exception such as that. Surely there are many, but there are also many cases where people really care about the mission of some kind of organization. You might think that USAID is doing a great job. You might think that UN HRC is doing a great job. The UN refugee aid organization. You might think that Human Rights Watch is doing an amazing job. Donate to them, even if nobody knows, and you have no connection. You might feel good about that, but only if you think that there is something valuable about motivating that and supporting that undertaking. And the last case they consider is the person who decides to devote their life to work with terminally ill and contagious people, like some people who worked with lepers a longer time ago. I think Broad has Mother Teresa in mind here, and some people choose a life where they know that they're very likely to suffer as a result as well. They might have all kinds of egoistic motivation. They want to help. They want to create. They want to be canonized as a saint. They want other people to regard them well. They want to make their organization more popular, and so on and so on. But the main thing is that independently of that, most likely they only gain the fame and they only will be regarded well if they choose something that they care about and that is a good purpose, actually. Now the other thing is that sometimes people will want to do things where they feel that, well, other people are suffering and I don't want them to suffer because it upsets me. And some people defending egoism would say that, well, what's going on here is, you see, this person is helping the sufferers because he wants their suffering to end so that he gets rid of his own unpleasant experience of imagining the suffering of others. Sure, but there are so many easier ways of getting rid of such second-hand suffering. There are millions of ways to divert oneself, and surely going and working with the people who are actually suffering and trying to help them is not the best way. It's probably one of the worst ways of doing that. So this is a very weak explanation, and there is very little evidence to support it. What the results are, if you put it very shortly, is that I think Broad makes here just a couple of points. One is that most motivations seem to be other regarding, even if they're self-referential. And not even all self-contained motives can be reduced to desires for our own happiness. Another takeaway, so to say, is that other regarding motives require a self-referential stimulus, but there are probably exceptions, even if they are not common. And psychological egoism is doubtful, even if it's diluted form, because of the kind of cases like A, B, and C, where there seem to be some limits to what kind of actions it can explain. It doesn't mean that its explanatory power is not great. It is. However, because there are limits and there are not very tiny number, not just one or two exceptions, but significant number of exceptions, it seems that it's not necessarily the best way to think about motivation. It's probably one of the good ways. It's not a bad heuristic that's often going to yield correct explanations, but it's not universally true theory that doesn't have exceptions. One of the interesting things that results from this as well is that there are many kinds of motivations, and if there would be only one kind of motivations, the way psychological hedonism says, we would only need to think about ethical hedonism. If there would be only a handful of self-contained egoistic motivations, we could look at some very simple theories of motivations as well, relatively simple theories of motivations. Why? Because nobody can be under obligation to do something that is psychologically impossible. If people would only be able to act in order to gain pleasurable experiences, we couldn't expect them to do anything else. If people would only be able to act in egoistic ways, we couldn't expect them to do anything else. But they do seem to be able to act in different ways, hence we can expect people to act in different ways. And we can grant people rights to pursue all kinds of projects because they can take on the duties, the obligations to help other people as well, and to protect other people and aid other people in achieving similar things. So the point about egoism has this kind of ethical and even political takeaway. And this is the very short, fun, and quite elegant paper by Broad and my little bit long but hopefully useful explanation of it. So thank you all for bearing with me and joining in today, and hope you have a lovely day. Keep thinking and keep having fun. Bye bye.